In this video, we are going to be talking about camera recommendations. That has been one of the most requested topics right here in the channel in 2020 and also in 2019. But today we're going to be talking about 4 cameras that I got the chance to use in 2020. Cameras that I consider that they are great cameras. They're not going to break the bank, and they're going to give you a great results whether you're trying to shoot photography or videos. Why don't we get started? Welcome back to the channel, guys, and remember, we are only a week away from this announcement of the Sony A7C, and all you have to do is simply subscribe to this channel, enable notifications, and must follow me on Instagram and Twitter at Gaston Shutters. And once again, I'll be making the announcement of the brand new Sony A7C with kit lens on Christmas. So good luck to all of you guys, and yes, I'll be shipping all around the world. All right, let's start talking about these 2 APS-C cameras that I consider to be one of the greatest APS-C cameras ever created and APS-C cameras that I ever used. So the first one is going to be the A6400. We're also going to be talking about the A6600. Both cameras are very similar. They're also very similar in size, but there are slight differences. And let's talk about the things that both cameras have in common. The first thing is going to be the 24 megapixel sensor that both cameras share. And this sensor is going to be great because I consider 24 megapixels being kind of like the happy medium between great resolution and also great low light performance. So these cameras are gonna give you excellent footage, excellent image, in low light situations without introducing a lot of noise. Now, the other thing that both cameras feature is the compactness of the body. They're very small, they're very portable. And the other great thing about this camera is that the lenses for APS-C for the system are going to be lenses that are not going to break the bank neither. So I am going to be talking about 3 lenses in just a moment that you should actually consider. Now, the other great feature about this camera is that they are fairly light, and they also have a pop-up screen. So you're going to be able to shoot yourself and look at your framing, without having to put an additional monitor. Obviously, these are cameras that also are incredible for photography. I'm going to be showing you some pictures as I'm talking here that I've been shooting with the Sony A6400. Now, one of the main highlights I think about this camera is that all Sony cameras now these days, they feature incredible autofocusing system, and the Sony A6400 and the A6600 feature real-time autofocus like I'm doing right now because I'm shooting this video in my A6600, so I can move around closer to the camera, go further away, and the camera is going to track my eye with a box, and I'm always going to be in focus. Now, when it comes to dials and control, you're not going to have the same control of the full frame body like the Sony A7 III, for example, but I think that you can accomplish and get used to most tasks with this camera, fairly easy. Now, let's talk about battery life, because here there's going to be a difference between the A6400 and the A6600. The A6400 features the MP-FW50 battery, which is actually a little bit smaller, and you could get average at about 1.5 hours up to 2 hours with one charge, where the Sony A6600 uses the MP-FZ100 batteries, which is the same battery that all the full frame cameras use, and you can get up to 2 hours, up to 3 hours, depending, how much you use the camera and so on. Now, the other main difference that you're going to see from the A6400 and the A6600 is that the A6600 features IBIS. However, and this is the big however, I consider the IBIS of the A6600 good for slow motion, but a lot of the times if you're going to be vlogging with a camera, to be honest with you, between the A6400 and the A6600 with the IBIS enabled, you're not going to see a lot of difference, so don't think that this IBIS is going to replace a gimbal. Now, let's talk about prices, because both cameras, they have a fairly good gap in between, and the A6400 is going to go for around $900, where the A6600 is going to go for around $1,500. Now, all these prices, they tend to change, as you're getting closer to the holidays, and, a lot of the times, you may find this camera, in a super good sale. I actually checked Adorama sells a lot of used cameras that they look almost brand new for like a couple of $100s off. So I would consider this cameras also used if you are on a budget. All right, the other thing that I want to mention is that both cameras, the A6400 and the A6600, are going to feature only one single SD card slot. Don't cheap out on SD cards. Now, both cameras are gonna have a hot shoe mount that it allows you to connect, several accessories such as a microphone, remote triggers, and so on. However, and this is the big however, both cameras have the pop-up screen, of course, that's gonna allow you to frame yourself, and it's a great feature, but the moment you actually put a microphone and a lavalier or any accessory on top of the camera, you're gonna be blocking the screen. So if you're gonna be using this camera for vlogging, just keep that in mind. The screen does not flip to the side, and that may be kind of like a bummer for a lot of you guys. In my opinion, I don't have a problem. I've been using this camera right here in this tripod. I have a microphone right here, so I don't have a need to actually vlog with this camera. And I've been using another camera for that I'm going to talk in just a moment. Now let's talk about some lens options for this system, for the A6400, A6600, and any of the A6000 cameras. One of the great things about APS-C camera is that the lenses are fairly affordable, and you're going to find options from also third-party manufacturers. And one of the lenses that I recommend that you check out are going to be three. Number one is going to be the 56mm f1.4, the 30mm f1.4, and the 16mm f1.4 from Sigma, which is the lens that I'm using right now to film this video. These lenses are going to range around the $300 and $400, and again, a lot of the times you're going to find sales. So to get like three lenses for around $1,200 is actually really remarkable. And we're talking about prime lenses. The quality of these lenses are incredible. They're going to be great for video. They're going to be great for photography. And the best part is that these lenses are actually fairly small. Now let me also talk about a zoom lens that I really like, and that is going to be the 16 to 55mm f2.8 lens from Sony. Now this lens is an equivalent to a 24 to 70mm f2.8, and in my opinion is one of the best zoom lenses that you're going to be able to get for this system. Go and try to find something similar, but they perform flawless, and the lens is also pretty light, and the image quality is really good. Now one of the great things about APS-C cameras from Sony is that you can also use full frame glass on the Sony APS-C bodies, unlike Canon, for example, that you have to get the M series lenses for those APS-C cameras. With Sony, you don't have this problem. You can use any full frame glass in the camera. You just got to be mindful of the crop. All right, let's talk about another camera that the whole internet has been talking about, but I've been using this camera a lot, almost on a daily basis, and this one is the Sony A7 III. Now, the Sony A7 III is a full frame body camera. You're gonna have a larger sensor, and it still has a 24 megapixel, but because the sensor is larger, the pixels are also larger, and you're gonna get better low light performance than an APS-C camera. Now, I actually compare the Sony A7 III versus the Sony A6600, and to be honest with you, when it comes to low light performance, they're kind of like at the same level. Yes, there is a little bit better, performance with a full frame, but just keep that in mind. The difference is not gonna be that drastic, guys. Now, the other thing is that the Sony A7 III is a proper full frame body. So in this camera, you're gonna find all the dials. You're gonna have your dial for the aperture, your dial for the shutter speed, and also you're gonna have a dial dedicated for the ISO, which is kind of like that D-pad. And in my opinion, I'd much rather shoot manual with those type of cameras. Now, when it comes to the weight of the camera and the size, yes, the full frame body is going to be a little bit larger, but Sony probably has one of the smallest, full frame bodies, and still, in my opinion, pretty compact and portable, to travel with them. Now, let's talk about video features, because here we may actually find a difference, and to be honest with you, there's going to be an advantage actually going with APS-C, because the Sony A7 III is a much older technology, so you're going to have real-time tracking in photos, but you're not going to have real-time tracking in 4K videos. Now, one little trick that you can do to still remain in focus as you move is to locate the little focus box around right here. So if you move around, you're still gonna be in focus, but don't do this or this, because the camera is not going to be able to track you. Now, when it comes to still, you're also going to have real-time tracking. It just doesn't happen in video. 4K at least, I believe it has it in HD, but not in 4K video. So something to keep in mind, because I think that's going to be probably the main difference between going with an A6400 or A6600 versus the Sony A7 III. Now, when it comes to IBIS, the Sony A7 III does has IBIS, and it's a little bit better than the one on the A6600, but again, it's nowhere near as the Olympus IBIS, for example, or some of the Panasonics like the GH5. I think that Sony's still a little behind when it comes to IBIS, and the only camera, in my opinion, that has great IBIS or better IBIS than these type of cameras is the Sony A7 III. but the camera is gonna cost you $3,500. Now, remember, the APS-C bodies feature one SD card slot, and now the Sony A7 III is gonna feature two SD card slots, one of them being UHS 1 and the other one being UHS 2. So this is gonna allow you to actually have redundancy backup of your videos or photography. Now, for those that shoot weddings and events, you can actually rest assured that you're gonna have that backup redundancy into the secondary card. Now, there's a disadvantage going with the Sony A7 III if you're trying to do videos like this one. This camera doesn't have a flip up or flip out screen. The screen actually tilts up and down, but you're not gonna be able to frame yourself or see yourself. Now, when it comes to ports, you're gonna have exactly the same ports, whether you go APS-C with the A6400 or A6600, or if you go with the Sony A7 III. So those ports are gonna be, you're gonna have a microphone port, you're gonna have a headphone jack, you're gonna have a USB port, and you are gonna have an HDMI port. So if you're trying to connect an external monitor, you can do that. If you're trying to monitor your audio, you can do that. And of course, you can connect any microphone through the 3.5mm jack. And also, most Sony cameras, you can connect microphones right from the hot shoe mount, and Sony features a lot of microphones that connect right there. So this is gonna be great because most of those microphones are not gonna require an additional battery or cable. Now, just like the APS-C cameras, the Sony A7 III is going to accept full frame glass, of course, a full frame camera, but also you can put APS-C glass in the Sony A7 III, and the only thing that's gonna happen is that the camera is gonna crop, to compensate with the APS-C, so you're gonna be using a portion of your sensor. Now, one thing that you gotta keep in mind is that your resolution is gonna go way lower, and I believe it is at around 16 megapixels, if I'm not mistaken, when you are in APS-C mode, but a lot of the time that's gonna be more than enough for video because all you need is 8.5 megapixel for 4K. So, video quality is not going to diminish. And I think that could be an advantage if you're trying to travel with, let's say, one prime lens full frame and then, have some other APS-C glass for X reasons for video. So, good stuff there. Now, when it comes to gimbals, I've used the Sony A7 III in gimbals, and to be honest with you, it just works really good. One thing that you're gonna have to be mindful is in the size of the lenses, because a lot of lenses are even heavier than the camera itself, and this is when you have to start paying attention to the payload of the gimbal that you're gonna be using. But one of the things that I've been doing, like I mentioned before, I use a lot of the times, my APS-C glass from Sigma, whether it is the 16 or the 30 millimeters or the 56 millimeters, and it just works just fine. All right, now we're going to talk about the fourth camera, and this one is one of the latest camera that Sony released, and it is the Sony A7C, which it happens to be the same camera that I'm actually giving away for free, guys. Now let's talk about the Sony A7C, because I believe that this camera is kind of like a combination between the best thing from the Sony A7 III and the best thing from the Sony A6600. So let's talk about the Sony A7C. The first thing is going to be the form factor of this camera. This camera is going to feature a very similar form factor as the Sony A6600. It also features the big battery, the MP-FZ100 battery, that's going to give you tons of power. Now, the main thing that separates the Sony A7C from all these cameras that we mentioned before is that this one has a flip out screen, and this is going to be great because if you want to put a microphone on top of the camera, you're not going to be blocking the screen. And the only downside, I think, is that Sony doesn't, allow us yet to have touchscreen capabilities in the camera, because that would have been great. Now, you can actually touch to focus like on all the other cameras, like the A6000 line and the Sony A7 III, but no new menus or no, touchscreen control in the camera. I really like the camera. It also features the same 24 megapixel sensor from the Sony A7 III. It has an incredible image quality, and in my opinion, it has a little bit better color science than the other cameras that I just mentioned before. Now, when it comes to real-time tracking, this is where this camera actually shines, and in my opinion, when it comes to video, it's a little bit better than the Sony A7 III because it's gonna track your eye real time in 4K, and it's also gonna do it in picture mode. So the Sony A7C, it's kind of like a camera that is a an entry-level full-frame camera, but at the same time, it features a lot of the advanced features that you may find in much more expensive cameras. Now, when it comes to video features, all these cameras that we're talking about today are going to feature 4K video up to 30p, 8-bit, 420, and this is exactly what I've been using for all my videos here in the channel, aside from some of the videos that I've been using the Sony A7 III for B-roll, which actually does 10-bit. So, in my opinion, for most situations, you're not going to need 10-bit unless you want to get into heavy color grading or, larger production. But to be honest with you, if you get creative, if you dial your camera right, you're going to get great results. Now let's talk about a disadvantage that I think the Sony A7C has over the Sony A7 III, and it is that it features only one SD card slot. This one is UHS 2, but it only has one. Once again, I haven't had any problem with the Sony A7C, and to me it's not a big deal because I'm not using that camera for client work or anything like that. We're using for things that we can risk to actually retake the footage if anything goes wrong. Now let's talk about the EBF of the Sony A7C, because this camera, even though it's a full frame camera, is going to feature the same viewfinder as the Sony A6600. It's going to be on the side, the little square, but in my opinion, it just gets the job done. Now, the Sony A7C is a great camera, but there are another disadvantage, and I think that you have less custom buttons than APS-C cameras or the Sony A7 III. So if you're looking for a camera with all the dials and all the buttons, probably the Sony A7 III is the best bang for the buck today. But the Sony A7C has even less buttons than the Sony A6600. So you could also look into the Sony A6600 if you don't want to spend a lot of money in lenses and you want to, stay pretty small and compact. Now, when it comes to IBIS, the Sony A7C does feature 5-stop IBIS image stabilization, sensor image stabilization, but in my opinion, the Sony A7 III does a better job at image stabilization, and even though I don't consider the Sony A7 III a great IBIS, so this can actually tell you more or less the performance of the IBIS of the Sony A7C. Now, all Sony cameras don't have a rock-solid IBIS, and even the Sony A7 III that is much more expensive, when it comes to really shaky footage, the camera cannot handle it, guys. So in this situation, use a gimbal. So this is going to be a determining factor whether you're going to go for a camera with IBIS or without IBIS, because to be honest with you, if you're going to be shooting a lot of motion, a lot of action, you better off getting a gimbal, spending the camera in the gimbal, than spending the additional $500 from the Sony A6400 to the Sony A6600. All right, now let's talk about the ports. Once again, the Sony A7C is going to feature the same ports that you're going to find on all the cameras that we talked today. So you're going to be able to plug microphones, headphones. You also have an HDMI. It's a mini HDMI, but it works. And you're going to have a USB-C to charge the camera while shooting. So in my opinion, that is great. Now let's talk about the one determining factor that may be a deal breaker for you, and it is that the Sony A7 III is the only camera out of these 4 cameras that has a 30-minute limit. So after 30 minutes, the camera is going to shut down, and then you have to start the video all over again. Now the A6400, A6600, and the Sony A7C, they can record until the SD card runs out or until you run out of power. But remember, you can power this camera via USB-C. Therefore, you can basically record until your SD card gets full. So it's going to be very, very handy. All right, let's talk about glass for full frame, and these are going to be my first recommendation. If you are trying to save some money, look at glass from Tamron. For example, there is the 28mm to 75 f2.8, which is kind of equivalent to the 24 to 70 from Sony G Master f2.8, but the price difference is going to be huge. I'll be listing the price right here, guys. Also, when it comes to full frame glass, if you're going to be trying to shoot portraits, I recommend the 85mm f1.8 glass from Sony. This lens is super compact. The image quality is incredible. Another glass that I enjoy a lot full frame is the size Sony, the 55mm f1.8. And again, it's really small, and all these glasses are going to suit really good the Sony A7C or the APS-C body because of the reduced size. And last but not least, I tell you to check out the Sony 35mm f1.8. Also, it's a very small glass, and the image quality is really good, but there are also offerings from Tamron. They're making really good glass. Once again, there is so much glass out there these days. Sigma has been killing it. Rokinon also has been killing it, and I recommend that you just go check out everything that's out there. But these are the main glasses that I've been using in 2020, and I can strongly recommend, guys. So this is gonna wrap it up for today, guys. Let me know which one is your favorite camera. Do you have plans of getting a brand new camera? Drop your comments down below, and as always, guys, subscribe to this channel for more content like this one. And I hope that some of you guys is gonna be the lucky winner. See you on the next video.